The first thing I felt wasn't the slap across my cheek. It was the silence that followed it. My son, Ryan, stood there, eyes narrowed, his hands still trembling in the air like he hadn't expected himself to go that far. "Either you sign over the car to me today or you're done here, Dad," he spat, his voice cracking with rage. "My car. The one I bought with 40 years of sweat and missed birthdays. The one I kept polished like a relic of everything I had built with my own 2 hands." He said it like it was nothing, like it was already his. The sting on my cheek was sharp, but the sting inside cut deeper. Across the room, Amanda, my own daughter, leaned against the counter, arms crossed, her face cool as marble. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," she said. No flinch, no hesitation, as if she'd rehearsed the line in a mirror. I looked at her, hoping for even a flicker of regret. There was none. She just tilted her head toward Ryan as though she were backing up a lawyer in court. My own blood lined up against me. I didn't move at first, didn't shout, didn't even raise a hand to the mark burning on my skin. Instead, I let my eyes drop to the floor, to the scuff marks their shoes had left on the hardwood I'd refinished myself. Every dent, every scratch, every memory of the home I tried to hold together. It all stared back at me. Ryan mistook my quiet for weakness. He thought I was folding. He was wrong. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. My spare set. He dangled them like a trophy. "You don't even drive it anymore," he sneered. "What's the point of you holding on to it when I could actually use it? Think of it as repaying us for letting you stay here after Mom passed." His words hit harder than the slap. Letting me stay? As if my entire life, my roof, my food, my bills hadn't gone into raising them. I steadied myself against the table, the oak grain rough under my fingertips, and finally found my voice. "You want my car? Earn one. You want my life's work? Build your own." My voice was low, but every word cut like broken glass. Ryan's face twisted. Amanda rolled her eyes. "You're unbelievable," she said flatly. "We've done everything for you. Do you even remember who handled your surgery bills? Who bought your groceries when you couldn't walk?" Her tone dripped with the kind of contempt only children can summon when they've convinced themselves their parents are relics to be discarded. "If you don't hand it over, you'll be out before the week's done. That's final." My heart pounded in my chest, not from fear, but from clarity. I stood up slowly, forcing my back straight, ignoring the ache that shot through my hip. I looked Ryan dead in the eye. "Then you better start packing my things," I said evenly. His smirk faltered for just a second. He expected begging. He expected me to crumble. Instead, I gave him a promise. And promises, unlike possessions, don't break so easily. I walked past them, each step deliberate, heavy, carrying pieces of the man they thought they had already buried. The hallway felt longer than it ever had. Family photos lined the walls. Amanda at 5, missing her front tooth. Ryan at 12, grinning with a baseball glove too big for his hand. Their mother, gone 10 years now, her smile frozen in sunlight that I thought would last forever. I stopped at one photo, Amanda's graduation day. My arm was around her, my face proud, hers shining with ambition. I thought I had done right. I thought sacrifice meant something. But the woman in that kitchen, siding with her brother against me, was not the girl in that picture. Inside the guest room, the air smelled faintly of detergent and dust. My suitcase sat in the closet, waiting like it had known this day would come. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from clarity. I pulled the suitcase down and set it on the bed. As I unzipped it, I caught sight of an old leather pouch tucked behind the nightstand drawer. Inside was my wife's wedding band, smooth and warm against my palm, even after all these years. I whispered her name under my breath. "Linda, you'd know what to do." A tear threatened, but I swallowed it back. Not tonight. Not now. Tears wouldn't save me. Resolve would. From the kitchen, I heard the faint sound of laughter. Ryan and Amanda, their voices mingling, dismissing me as though I were nothing more than an obstacle they'd finally stepped over. My jaw tightened. They thought silence meant surrender. They thought pushing me out would erase me. They were wrong. I sat on the edge of the bed, my suitcase gaping open like some hungry mouth, waiting to swallow what little of my life I had left. My hands hovered over the drawer, the same drawer where Amanda once kept coloring books when she was small, pages filled with crooked rainbows and misshapen stars. Back then, she used to climb into my lap and show me her work with a grin so wide it nearly split her cheeks. Now she stood in the kitchen with her arms folded, demanding my car like it was a birthright. I pulled out a stack of shirts, folded them neatly, not because I cared how they'd fit inside the suitcase, but because the act of folding gave me something steady to cling to. The burn on my cheek still throbbed where Ryan had struck me, but that pain was nothing compared to the deep ache clawing inside my chest. I had fought worse things. Fires that ate entire homes, surgeries that nearly broke me, nights alone when Linda was in the hospital gasping for breath. But this betrayal from my own children, is seared in a way no flame could. I pulled open another drawer and found the small envelope I had tucked away months ago. Inside were photocopies of my insurance cards, my driver's license, and the routing numbers to accounts I had written down in my shaky handwriting. At the time, I didn't know why I hid them here, away from Amanda's prying eyes. Maybe I had known. Maybe some part of me always suspected that the help she gave me wasn't kindness but control. I slipped the envelope into the inner pocket of my jacket, patting it flat as if to reassure myself it was still real. My name was still mine, no matter how they tried to strip me down. From the other room, I heard Ryan's laughter, loud, sharp, smug. "He'll cave," he said, his voice carrying down the hall. "He always does. Old men like him can't survive on their own. He needs us." Amanda's quieter reply followed, but it cut deeper. "He won't last a week out there." Their words tangled together in my ears, turning into a steady hum of contempt that filled the whole house. They believed I was broken, fragile, ready to bend. They believed I was a burden dressed in worn-out flannel and faded jeans. But they had forgotten something. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Silence doesn't mean surrender. I packed methodically, pulling from memory the way I used to pack for 24-hour shifts at the station. Socks rolled, shirts layered, tools at the bottom just in case. I stopped when my hand brushed something cool at the back of the drawer. A notebook, old, leather-bound, corners frayed, pages smudged with the oils of 100 different days. Inside were grocery lists, old phone numbers of men I hadn't called in years, scribbles Linda once made while talking to me on the phone. On the very last page were numbers, written in my own slanted scrawl. Account numbers, bank, credit union, hidden lifelines my children didn't know about. My pulse steadied as I traced the lines. They thought they had taken everything, but they hadn't. Not yet. I slipped the notebook into my jacket and zipped the suitcase shut. The sound was final, sharp, like a lock clicking closed. I sat there for a moment, listening to the muted television in the other room. Some mindless show Amanda loved, laughter rising from the speakers that didn't belong to me. Not once did she knock on the door. Not once did Ryan ask if I was all right after the slap. Their contempt was complete, but so was my clarity. I stood, gripping the suitcase handle, and walked down the hallway lined with photographs. Each frame seemed to stare at me with glassy accusation. Amanda at 6 clutching a stuffed rabbit. Ryan at 10, standing proudly beside the rickety treehouse I built. Linda smiling in a garden that doesn't bloom anymore. Each one asked me the same question. How did you let it come to this? I had no answer, only resolve. When I stepped back into the living room, Amanda glanced up from the couch. Ryan didn't even look away from his phone. The blue glow lit his face, arrogance painted across every feature. "Where are you going?" Amanda asked, her voice flat, rehearsed. I met her eyes without flinching. "Out," I said. "Before sunset, like you wanted." For the first time all evening, her composure cracked. Just a flicker, just a shadow across her face. But it was enough. She had expected begging. She had expected me to argue, to plead, to hand over what they demanded. Instead, I gave her nothing. I opened the door, the evening air rushing in cool and clean compared to the staleness inside. My hip ached as I lifted the suitcase, but I kept my back straight, my steps steady. Behind me, I heard Ryan's laugh again. "He won't last a day." Amanda didn't reply. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door with deliberate finality. The sound echoed through me. Not an ending, but a beginning. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the quiet street. Neighbors' lights flicked on, one by one, families settling into dinners and television and warmth. I walked slowly down the steps, each movement pulling a piece of my old life further away. At the end of the driveway, I paused, staring at the house I had once built into a home. The curtains glowed golden from within, but there was no warmth left for me there. I tightened my grip on the suitcase and turned my back on it. The night was open, uncertain, but it was mine. The street was quiet as I dragged my suitcase along the cracked sidewalk, the wheels bumping against every uneven stone. It felt strange, stepping away from the house I had poured decades of labor into. But stranger still was the sensation that I wasn't leaving a home behind. I was leaving strangers who had my blood but not my heart. My cheek still throbbed from Ryan's slap, a phantom sting that pulsed every time I thought of his words. "You'll be out before the week's done." He had meant it as an ultimatum, but to me it sounded like a liberation. The air outside was cooler than inside that poisonous kitchen, and with every step I took, the weight pressing on my chest seemed to lighten. Still, my mind ran wild. Where would I go? What would I do? The savings account, hidden for years, would give me some breathing room, but it wasn't endless. I had to move carefully. I had to be smart. I reached the corner and stopped under a flickering streetlight. Across the road, the diner glowed faintly, its neon sign buzzing like an old friend clearing its throat. How many nights had I stumbled into that place after long shifts, boots covered in soot, eyes rimmed with smoke, only to be met with a hot cup of coffee and a slice of pie. The place hadn't changed in 20 years, even if I had. My legs carried me there before my brain had time to argue. The bell above the door jingled softly as I stepped inside. The smell of grease, coffee, and faint vanilla hit me like a wave of memory. Behind the counter, Carol looked up. She was older now, gray streaking her hair, but her smile was the same. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Thompson," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "Haven't seen you in a while. You look like hell." I almost laughed, almost told her she had no idea, but instead, I gave a tired nod. "Rough night," I admitted, sliding onto a stool and setting my suitcase beside me. Her eyes flicked down to it, then back up. She didn't pry. That was Carol's way. She poured me coffee without asking, set it in front of me, and leaned against the counter. "You want pie?" she asked. I hesitated, then nodded. "Apple. Warm if you've got it." She gave a small smile. "Always." As I sipped the coffee, hot and bitter, I stared at the steam rising and let the silence settle between us. In that stillness, I thought about Linda. She used to sit beside me in this very booth, laughing at my bad jokes, stealing bites of my pie when she swore she wasn't hungry. She would know what to say now. She always did. But the seat beside me was empty, and the only voices in my head were Ryan's and Amanda's, sharp with accusation. Carol slid the plate in front of me, the crust golden, the filling bubbling. I took a bite and closed my eyes, the warmth spreading through me like an anchor. For just a moment, I felt steady. "Looks like you've had more than a rough night," Carol finally said softly. Her eyes were sharp but kind, the kind that had seen more than people gave her credit for. I thought about lying, brushing it off, but what was the point? My children had already stripped me down. Hiding the truth wouldn't protect me anymore. "They want me out," I said, my voice rougher than I expected. "My own son slapped me tonight. My daughter stood there and let him. They told me if I don't give him my car, I'm gone." The words spilled heavier than the coffee in my cup. Carol's lips pressed into a thin line, her hand tightening around the towel. "Those ungrateful kids," she muttered. "After everything you've done for them." I shook my head slowly. "I thought I raised them better. I thought sacrifice meant something." My voice cracked on the last word, and I forced myself to swallow it back. Tears wouldn't fix anything. Carol reached across the counter, laid her hand over mine. It was warm, grounding. "You don't deserve that," she said firmly. "Don't you let them make you believe you do." Her words sank deep, soothing something raw inside me. For the first time that night, I felt less alone. I stayed in that diner for hours, nursing the coffee until it went cold, eating every crumb of the pie as if it were fuel. Customers trickled in and out, truckers, night shift nurses, a young couple holding hands and whispering about tomorrow. Life moved on, steady and indifferent. When the clock struck midnight, I stood, sliding a few bills onto the counter. Carol shook her head. "On the house," she said. I met her eyes, wanting to argue, but she gave me that look, firm, unshakable. "You've done enough for this town. Let someone do something for you." I nodded, too tired to fight, and picked up my suitcase. Outside, the night air was crisp, stars scattered across the sky like shards of broken glass. I sat on the bench near the diner's entrance, the wood creaking under me, and pulled out my notebook. I flipped to the page with the account numbers, tracing them with my finger. I still had options. I still had control. My children thought they had taken everything, but they hadn't taken this. They hadn't taken my name, my will, my memories. Those were mine and mine alone. As I sat there, a thought began to bloom, small but persistent. If they wanted me gone, then I would go. But not as the broken man they imagined. I would go as someone who still had power, someone who still had a voice. Maybe I'd start fresh in a place where no one knew my name. Maybe I'd find work. Maybe I'd even find a way to remind Ryan and Amanda that betrayal has a price. The ache in my chest burned into something new. Resolve. They thought silence meant surrender. They were wrong. The clock at the gas station across the street flicked to 12:30. I stood, gripped the handle of my suitcase, and started walking again. The road stretched long and uncertain, but for the first time that day, it felt like it belonged to me. I didn't know where it led, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not let them write the final chapter of my story. That was mine to write, and I had just picked up the pen. The suitcase felt heavier with every step, not because of the shirts and socks inside, but because of the weight of finality that clung to me like damp air. The town I had lived in for decades stretched quiet and indifferent around me. Porch lights flickered, dogs barked distantly, and windows glowed with the warmth of families settling down for the night. I had been part of that rhythm once. Sunday dinners, movie nights, birthdays that filled the house with laughter. Now I was a ghost drifting past it all, carrying the echo of memories in a battered case. My legs ached, my hip protested, but I kept moving because the alternative was going back. And there was no going back. Not anymore. I stopped at the bus depot, the kind of place that hadn't seen paint or repair in 20 years. The benches were warped wood, the ticket window shut behind cloudy glass. A lone light hummed overhead, bathing everything in pale yellow. A poster on the wall curled at the edges, announcing routes that stretched far beyond this town. Dallas, Denver, Chicago. Names that seemed almost mythical to me. Places where nobody would know Amanda's sharp voice or Ryan's raised hand. The thought stirred something inside me, fear, yes, but also freedom. I lowered myself onto the bench, my joints creaking louder than the wood. The night pressed in, heavy and silent. I pulled out the leather notebook again, its pages soft from years of handling. I ran my thumb over Linda's handwriting, loops and curls and faded ink. A grocery list she had scrawled one Saturday morning. Tomatoes, onions, flour, cinnamon. Ordinary words, but they hit me like a prayer. She had been the glue. Without her, I had tried to hold the pieces together myself, but now those pieces had sharp edges, cutting me every time I touched them. My children weren't children anymore. They were strangers dressed in familiar skin. I opened to the back page, staring at the account numbers. There wasn't much money, but enough for a start. Enough for a bus ticket, maybe a few weeks of rent in some small apartment. Enough to remind me that I still had choices. Amanda thought I was trapped, Ryan thought I was helpless, but they didn't know everything. I had fought fires hotter than their contempt. I had faced nights longer than their cruelty. I wasn't done yet. The first bus pulled in at 2 a.m., brakes squealing, headlights cutting through the dark. A handful of passengers stepped off, eyes bleary, jackets pulled tight. The driver glanced at me, then away. I didn't stand. Not yet. My body was here, but my mind was back in that house, standing in front of Amanda and Ryan, watching the smugness on their faces. They believed they had stripped me down to nothing. But maybe that was my chance to rebuild, not as who they wanted, but as who I chose to be. By dawn, I had decided. I wasn't going to waste another breath begging for their respect. They had shown me who they were. My silence, my patience, my sacrifices. They saw them as weakness. But weakness and restraint are not the same thing. I stood, stretched my stiff legs, and bought a ticket for the next bus heading west. My hand shook slightly as I handed over the bills, but my voice was steady. "One seat," I said. The woman behind the glass stamped the ticket without a word. The slip of paper felt like a key in my palm. I boarded with the suitcase in tow, settling into a cracked vinyl seat. The engine rumbled, the bus shuddered, and as it pulled away, I looked out the window. The street slid past, the diner, the gas station, the grocery where Linda once held my hand in the checkout line. And then the house. My house. The curtains were still drawn, golden light spilling faintly from inside. My children were probably asleep in their beds, satisfied that they had one. They didn't see me passing. They didn't see me leaving. And maybe that was for the best. I turned my face from the glass and didn't look back again. The miles unfolded, farmland giving way to highways stretching toward horizons I hadn't dared to imagine in years. I pressed my forehead to the window, the vibration steady against my skull, and let the hum of the road soothe the storm inside me. For the first time in a long time, no one was shouting at me, no one was demanding anything. It was just me, the road, and the quiet. And in that quiet, a seed of something unfamiliar began to take root. Not despair, not defeat, but resolve. They thought they had erased me, but I was still here. I was still breathing. And I had the one thing they could never touch: time. Time to rebuild, time to decide who I wanted to be without the chains of guilt or obligation. They might have thrown me out of the house, but they hadn't thrown me out of myself. That part was mine to guard, mine to shape. As the bus rolled farther into the morning, I closed my eyes and pictured the look on Amanda's face when she realized I hadn't begged. The shock in Ryan's eyes when he saw I had walked out with my head high. They had expected a broken man. Instead, I had left them with a silence louder than any words. That silence would echo in that house, I knew, and someday it would drive them mad. When I opened my eyes again, the sun was breaking over the horizon, painting the world gold. For the first time in years, it felt like a new beginning instead of another ending. My suitcase was still heavy, my body still sore, but my spirit was standing taller than it had in years. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The bus rumbled on for hours, carrying me farther from the house I once called home and closer to the unknown. Yet with every passing mile, the weight inside me shifted. What had begun as grief was hardening into resolve. They thought they had erased me, discarded me like old furniture left on the curb, but they underestimated what silence can become when it sharpens into purpose. I wasn't only leaving, I was planning. A week later, I was settled into a small room above a hardware store 2 towns over. The rent was cheap, the bed stiff, but it was mine. Nobody yelled at me here. Nobody demanded my keys. Nobody struck me in the face for daring to exist. I found work helping in the shop, stacking lumber and advising customers on tools. The owner, a man named Dale, respected my years of firefighting and mechanical experience. It wasn't much, but each paycheck slipped into my pocket felt like proof. I could still stand, still build. At night, I pored over the leather notebook. The account numbers, the old contacts, even a letter Linda had once tucked into the back cover. Her handwriting steady and full of love. She had written, "If you're ever lost, remember, you are stronger than the fire because you walked through it." Her words became my compass. And with them came clarity. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted them, Amanda and Ryan, to feel the heat of the blaze they had set for me. I called a lawyer, not a flashy one, but a steady man who listened more than he spoke. I explained everything. The slap, the eviction, the threats to cut me off from my own accounts. He raised an eyebrow when I produced the notebook, revealing funds my children knew nothing about. "They believe you're penniless?" he asked. I nodded. A small smile touched his lips. "Then let them keep believing. That ignorance is your shield." Over the next months, we worked quietly. I shifted what little I had into safer places, secured my pensions, and filed paperwork ensuring Amanda and Ryan had no access. The house, which they assumed they would inherit, was still in my name. The lawyer helped me draft new documents. If anything happened to me, the property and remaining assets would bypass them entirely and go to charity, to a fund for firefighters' widows. My children's greedy hands would close around heir. News trickled back through a mutual acquaintance. Amanda had quit her job, expecting me to bankroll her comfort. Ryan had bought a new car under the assumption that my accounts were his safety net. They spent and schemed as if my silence meant surrender. Meanwhile, I stacked my paychecks, kept my head down, and built a wall of quiet vengeance around me. Then the day came when Amanda stormed into the lawyer's office, demanding to know why my checks weren't clearing in her hands anymore. I wasn't there to see it, but the lawyer later described her face. A mix of rage and disbelief. Ryan followed a week later, red-eyed and furious, yelling that I had betrayed him. But betrayal is a strange thing. They had betrayed me long before. All I had done was cut the cord they wrapped around my throat. Months turned into a year. I grew stronger. My hair thinned, my back ached, but my spirit stood taller than it had in decades. Dale promoted me to manage the hardware store, trusting me with the books, the schedules, the keys. For the first time since Linda's passing, I felt purpose. People in town knew me not as that old man who was thrown out, but as Tom, the reliable one at the shop. Respect, something my own blood refused me, was offered freely by strangers. Amanda and Ryan, however, were drowning. Word spread they were behind on bills, creditors circling like vultures. The car was repossessed, the house filled with shouting instead of laughter. They knocked on my door once. Amanda's voice, thin and shrill through the wood, begging, threatening, crying. I didn't open. I simply stood inside, silent, listening until her footsteps faded. And that silence was the sharpest blade of all. I never raised a hand to them, never shouted, never sought to humiliate them publicly. I didn't have to. Life, stripped of the safety net they thought I would always provide, did the work for me. Every unpaid bill, every sleepless night, every hollow meal they scraped together. It all came from the arrogance that pushed me out with nothing but a suitcase. One evening, I sat outside the shop as the sun dipped low, painting the world in fire. Dale brought me a cup of coffee and asked, "You ever think of going back?" I looked out at the horizon, at the life I had built from ashes, and shook my head. "No," I said. "Sometimes the fire burns down the wrong house. But when it clears, you build something better." Amanda and Ryan would never understand that. They believed fire only destroyed. But I had walked through flames my entire life. I knew better. Fire purifies. Fire hardens. Fire reveals. And as I sipped my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my hands, I realized the truth. I wasn't the one who lost everything. They were. If this story kept you hooked until the very end, don't leave without smashing that like button and subscribing to the channel. More shocking twists and stories of betrayal and revenge are waiting for you here, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.